Hi, you guys. Welcome back. And of course, if you're new to this channel, welcome. My name is Tracy, and in this video, I'm going to tell you guys about the Philip experiment. So stay tuned. The Philip experiment was an experiment that was conducted in Toronto, Ontario in 1972. Now, this experiment was conducted to determine whether the paranormal, like ghostly apparitions or poltergeist phenomena can be actually reproduced based on a person's mind or imagination. So this experiment was actually led by Dr. George Owen. And he is a member of the Toronto Parapsychological Research Society. And so members of his research society who were not actually self-identifying as mediums or specially gifted or talented in any type of psychic phenomena, but he had this group convene once a week to see if they could actually come up with their very own ghost story. The group who was conducting this experiment included 10 people in all, including the leader of this experiment, Dr. George Owen. And along with Dr. George Owen, the psychologist by the name of Joel Witten also attended each of these weekly meetings basically as an observer from his professional capacity. And then the other members of the group included Al, who is a self-employed heating engineer, Lorne, an industrial engineer, Andy, who is Lorne's wife, who's very artistic. She's the one who drew the picture of Philip. And we have Bernice, an accountant, Dorothy, a housewife, who's also trained in bookkeeping and accounting, and there's Sydney, the youngest member. And Sydney is a sociology student who was taking time off to work as a traveling salesman. And there was Sue, who's the chairman of the Canadian chapter of Mensa and a former nurse. She is the one who originated the story for Philip. And there was Iris, who is the wife of Dr. George Owen and director of the New Horizons Research Foundation. And she was also a co-founder of the Parapsychological Research Society in Toronto. Since the purpose of this group was to find out if the human mind could actually create paranormal or poltergeist phenomena, then that means that the mind of the participants had to be the ones that come up with the entire phenomenon itself. So rather than using an example of someone who was actually a real person who has died, they decided to come up with their very own person and to come up with this person's life story and history as well. And so that is how Philip was born. And as I pointed out earlier, Sue was the member of the group who had to come up with the story for this character by the name of Philip. And so Philip's story goes that Philip was an aristocratic Englishman living in the time of Oliver Cromwell, the mid-1600s. He was Catholic and had supported the king and was married to a beautiful but frigid and cruel wife, Dorothea. While out riding, he caught sight of a beautiful raven-haired gypsy girl, Margo, and instantly fell in love. Bringing her back to live in his gatehouse, he kept their affair secret. But Dorothea found out and accused Margo of witchcraft and husband stealing. Afraid to lose his reputation and possessions, Philip did not protest at Margo's trial, and so she was burned at the stake. Stricken with remorse, Philip took to pacing the battlements in despair, and finally committed suicide by throwing himself off the high wall. So Philip actually died in a very tragic death, which is the story in many paranormal stories. So the story that they came up with was actually great because not only was there a love triangle and there was, a cold and frigid wife and then a love affair with someone else. And then there was the tragic ending of the two lovers dying. So each week they would meet around a table and they would usually place the photo or image of the drawing of Philip in the middle of the table. And they would just place their hands all on the table. And this is beginning to sound a lot like table turning, which I talked about in a previous Halloween Spooktacular video. So go check that out if you haven't checked that out yet. But this seems very similar to the table turning. So they all had their hands placed on the table and they would simply sit around the table, speaking of Philip, discussing his life, kind of embellishing more and more onto the story of the character of Philip. And for the first year, they would meet each and every week. And during these meetings, they would sit in a meditative state. And then they would come out of the meditative state and explain what they had experienced during that time. And then they would go back into the meditative state once again, only to come back out and again have a discussion. Now, for the most part in that first year, during these meetings, they would simply, they would share some experiences that they were having during the meditation, as well as share some feelings such as feeling as though there was a presence in the room, for instance. But there was never any manifestation of Philip. The group finally decided to try a different approach to this experiment. So they decided to make it seem more like an actual seance, kind of conjuring the spirit of Philip to come forward, rather than to simply sit around and speak of Philip. So they dimmed the lights, lit candles and different colored lights as well, and they all sat around the table once again, but this time they put items from Philip's time period, as well as other pictures and other items and things like that, so that their experience was more similar to an actual seance. This time, they actually made contact. And so, Philip began to communicate with the group by rappings upon the table. And then they began to realize that Philip would answer the questions, one knock for yes and two knocks for no. And as they began to communicate more and more with Philip as the weeks went on, they began to realize that Philip's personality would even show through in his communication. So not only would he be knocking once for yes or twice for no, he would also be knocking in different patterns for laughter or, just kind of in different ways showing his own personality. But of course, the personality of Philip is really only the personality of the group itself. The communication with Philip also included movements by the table itself. The table actually started with just some jolting and, of course, the rapping sounds. But as the communication from Philip increased, so did the movements of the table itself. And so the table began to tilt, to twirl, and sometimes even stand up on one leg dancing. The Philip table was even known to levitate off the ground. After years of communicating with Philip, this experiment hit its climax on live television, where Philip was to communicate with the group in front of a live audience of 50 people, and it was also being televised for a documentary. And, of course, since they were always successful after they figured out how to conjure the spirit of Philip, Philip was definitely not shy and was able to deliver results in front of these audiences. So, after the Philip experiment was complete, there were other experiments done after that were similar as well. And those experiments were also a success. So other people from other places around the world were able to duplicate this experiment by creating their own character, their own character's life story, their own character's image, and then they were able to actually conjure that character's spirit to communicate with them. So, what do you guys think about this? This is an experiment that actually took place in 1972, and like I said, it was also recreated around the world with tons of success. Now, of course, there are a ton of skeptics around the Philip experiment. They say that there is no way to truly track where this power is coming from and so forth. And of course, there will never be a truly scientific answer to the paranormal, because anything that is beyond nature is also beyond the realm of everyday science. And according to Owen, in the end, the Philip experiment actually had a very therapeutic effect on the members of the Philip group. Now, the participants of the group were very close and like family. They're very tight-knit and happy, according to Al. And according to Andy, she attained increased social growth and self-confidence. And the group members are all far more open with each other, and as well, far more open in their daily lives. And they also all agree that shyness on social occasions seemed to have disappeared after being a part of the Philip experiment. And so it could be said that, this experiment just brought a group of people together and things, but I believe definitely in this therapeutic effect that the Philip experiment had, mostly because, if you remember, this group actually did a weekly meditation together. So over time, they were able to learn more and more how to still their minds. And then they took a very, sometimes would be looked at as a scary experience, having like a poltergeist phenomenon happen right before your eyes, but they didn't make it scary. They turned that situation into something to be curious about and into something that you can actually, grow in awareness because of. So this group, not only did they prove the power of the mind, especially when it's amplified by a group of people, but the Philip experiment also proved that meditation and other disciplines of the mind can actually be very beneficial in so many ways. More ways than you will ever know without ever giving it a try. Well, that about wraps it up for this video. So if you like this video, be sure to click that like button. And of course, if you're a viewer but not yet a subscriber, I would love for you to click subscribe today. And then once you've subscribed, be sure to click that bell so that you can be notified each and every time that I upload a new video. Thank you guys so much for watching and spending your time with me. I love you. And I'll see you next time. Bye.